My name is Jason.
My name is Judd.
And this is The Sixth Ring, a podcast about the trophy tabletop role-playing game.
And today's theme that we're going to focus on is fate, which is a good one.
Setting out.
So, hey Judd, I know that you and I have both, maybe in recent weeks and months, have been playing with some brand new role players. That's always a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with that, and maybe if you have some thoughts too, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
So I recently ran some Trophy Gold using Winter's Daughter, which is an intro adventure for the Dolmenwood OSR setting. I actually ran it to support my other podcast, Fear of a Black Dragon. I ran Trophy Gold, did a little conversion of Winter's Daughter, did Trophy Gold. And one of the interesting things about that session was I had someone at the table who was completely brand sparkling new to tabletop role-playing games, had never played a role-playing game, and I don't encounter that very often, but it's really, I should say I don't encounter it very often anymore. I used to encounter it all the time, but lately, all my play groups are just really experienced,
Mm-hmm.
When I realized that this person did not have any experience with role-playing games, I was initially a little hesitant or nervous because I thought that the collaborative play style and somewhat improv nature of Trophy Gold would be a problem for a new player. But as it turns out, that wasn't the case. And I would like to think it's because Trophy Gold actually is a pretty good game for new players. It could just be because this player is just really maybe very talented. I don't know. But I do think there was some stuff going on that made me think it wouldn't have gone as smoothly with something more complicated like, say, D&D. Have you had that experience generally with games?
I've had the experience that we go in to introducing a new player to a game thinking that all the things that we think are weird indie techniques are going to seem weird to them, but they don't know what's weird.
Right.
So they just don't know. I mean, my most vivid memory of playing with a brand new player is making up characters with my dad. And he was definitely in this situation where his character was in a bunch of tense relationships with a bunch of people around him. And he started telling me about how certain characters who he had difficult relationships with were going to support him because they had to, or else his character was in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that's great.
And I was like, well, let's play and find out how that goes. And he was like, no, dude, if that happens, I'm screwed. Like, that can't happen. And so it's just interesting that I'm curious to hear, like, what parts of Trophy Gold did the player, like, jump on, or what parts took a little time?
I just want to say something real quick because it occurred to me when you were saying that what we think is like advanced role-playing stuff, like indie game techniques, is maybe not for other people. I think what's going on there, it occurs to me that I, and I assume you, to some degree have had to deprogram from D&D.
Totally.
I came from D&D to, I think, my first indie game was Burning Wheel. I did like 40 or 50 sessions of Burning Wheel. And then from Burning Wheel, I kind of moved on to like even more niche indie stuff.
Right.
But it was like a process, It was a process of like unlearning the need for math, unlearning the need for minifigs or maps that you have to like move around on squares, like that kind of thing, right? I mean, I was never really super that kind of role player anyway. Like I'm a 2E guy, and so I kind of played in theater of the mind, like always, but I was familiar with the lingo and the language. And of course, the numbers were a big part of my role playing. And so I had to kind of like unlearn that stuff and to get to indie technique.
Right.
And I suspect that's the same with you, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the first indie RPG I ever played was Dust Devils. And there's a part of that game where a narration goes to a certain player. And I was sure that couldn't work. I was like, that can't work. That there's no way that'll happen. That'll destroy everything. Like I was so positive that would never work. And I feel like the first real technique that seemed strange to me and I threw out the window because it made me uncomfortable was troop play in Ars Magica back in the day.
Right,
and yeah, I think it was a 20-something year old's GMing ego and a lot of like just stuff I had to unlearn to get to the collaborative play that I enjoy now. I think it's easier to GM with a brand new player than it is to GM for someone who has been playing a game that isn't that good at the table of someone who's just an abusive jerk. Like,
yeah. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, yes.
but generally, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I mean, also, by the way, Dust Devils, I haven't played that in years. That's a great game. This is
Yes.
with the poker hands, right?
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So okay. Well, so Trophy Gold. I found that like it was a good gateway game for this new player because he was, and I was watching him really closely. He was like really focusing on just the few core elements of his character, which is what Trophy Gold gives you.
Yeah.
I could tell that like he was really grabbing onto that very easily. Like it was like an easy thing to understand, and maybe a bunch of hard mechanics wouldn't have been, or a bunch of details on his character sheet might have been harder. I don't know, but it seemed like he was having an easy go of it.
Yeah.
And I could tell that he was focusing on just like very much imagining the scene of what was going on, kind of responding to what was happening, responding to the questions I was asking, and that was all really good. I mean, I think that people are to some degree like natural storytellers. I think that's a part of being human, right?
Absolutely.
And a system like Trophy, and this is true of many indie games, but this is a Trophy podcast. So a system like Trophy really kind of gets out of the way. And I think it allows our instinct to tell stories to sort of take over. That's been my experience anyway. But, it's still a game, obviously. There's still rules. There's still structure.
Yeah.
But I think that those rules and structure sort of facilitate this storytelling headspace really good.
Yeah, it's not a lot. You're not going to look at a Trophy Gold character sheet and your eyes aren't going to cross. Like it's not
Right,
that kind of thing. You're looking at a Burning Wheel or Pathfinder or even D&D 5e, quite frankly.
5e is surprisingly complicated. For a lot of people who like in the last few years have like started role-playing games with 5e, I look at that and I'm like, there's a better way. I mean, 5e is a really good version of D&D, don't get me wrong, but like it's still pretty complex.
Yep.
Well, anyway, I just want to kind of share that a little bit.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be kind of a good way to kick things off. Why don't we go to the next segment?
Cool.
Clawing for gold.
Okay, so we are talking about Devil Aim for Me by Michael Van Vliet with art by, I'm going to get this wrong, Tim Lilliefors and Rapid Punches, and layout by our friend Natalie Ash. A little bit of disclosure here. Michael Van Vliet and Natalie Ash are contributors to the main Trophy books. I just want to kind of put that out there since we are connected to the main Trophy project. But yeah, Devil Aim for Me. This is the first time I had looked at this. I looked at it for the first time just in preparation for this. What do you think of it?
I really liked it. I mean, it's definitely why Dust Devils was on my mind. I think
I wondered if there was a connection there. We should say, before we go any further, we should say what it is.
Yeah.
So Devil Aim for Me is a light reskin of Trophy Dark that places the game in a sort of fantastic Wild West. The characters are sort of heading out into the scrubland to find this wanted man named Bantam. And it's structured like a Trophy Dark incursion with the 5 rings and terrors and temptations and all that stuff. It changes a few things here and there to make it work for its setting, but that's basically what it is. It's a reskin for like a sort of Weird West kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So would you like, Jeff?
Yeah, and I believe the words Weird West are in there. Immediately, I liked that it makes the West like a dangerous, dark place. It doesn't buy into the bullshit American myth of the Wild West. But in not buying into that, it also doesn't sacrifice any mythic, dark, horrific qualities, which I think is cool. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. It has a sentence about like, yeah, people are going west. No, it's not really all that wild compared to their other life, but
Right.
It is a very dangerous, like there are dangers. I like that. I like that it's not, it doesn't buy into Western myth that I feel like I was taught in American public school to make me feel better about things in a way that I think other Western RPGs very often did.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I mean, I'm actually not super well versed in other Western RPGs. Like I have played Dust Devils, but that's pretty much it. I guess Dogs in the Vineyard counts as well. But it's still pretty untrodden ground for me. I don't really do that genre, which is kind of funny because I actually do like westerns. Like I like western movies, you know, like it's not even a nostalgic thing. Like I think that the best westerns have like a very dark, almost noirish quality at times. Some of them do.
Yeah.
And you always kind of feel like there's something just under the surface, something really terrible. To me, the best westerns have this like sort of throbbing, pulsing, unspoken darkness going on, you know?
Yeah.
Like there's something under the surface. And I actually think that this Devil Aim for me like really captures that nicely. Like in sort of embracing like overt fantastic elements, it sort of like brings to the fore this idea of the mythic Wild West, right? And this sort of like darkness that is implied in a lot of cases. I was really, really into it. Rattle off a couple things I liked in addition to just the general feeling. I thought that cover art is sweet as hell. For starters, love that cover art. And then the details are really good here. I love some of the moments. They're a little more involved than a typical Trophy Dark moment, but they really paint a nice picture. I have a sample here. Off in the distance, a steam-powered train blows vaporous clouds in the air, scattering golden sunlight. Where are the train's occupants going? What comforts are they bringing with them to their destination? And what delicious delights are passing their lips in the dining car while you chew a bit of hardtack? I just love that it's not just a moment, but it also like has questions to help flesh out the characters' personalities and kind of what they think about the situation. So
yeah,
it's just filled with stuff like that.
There's some nice poetic lines. My favorite that I wrote down to definitely highlight was, and the outlaw who you're hunting is named Bantam. The line is, they say Bantam's boots melted and the bullets ran out of the holes in his chest like prairie dogs fleeing a flooded burrow.
That's so good.
I was like, oh man, that's good. Yeah, that is not overwritten. That is just perfectly written. It's really, really cool. Yeah, and the other thing I liked, it's like a tiny, tiny gender thing, but one of the drives is to get your sister out of jail. And I feel like
it's always the brother.
I feel like it most of the time would be the brother, right? Like most of the time you'd have a hell-raising brother. I love that there was a hell-raising sister who you have to get out of jail. I think that's cool.
Well, and even like core Trophy Dark, like the very, very core original release of the game, one of the drives, the initial drives, is get your brother out of Barcelona prison. So like even original Trophy Dark did that.
Yeah.
But
that's a nice homage then. Good.
Yeah.
Cool.
The way that Devil Aim for me handles conditions is really neat. So normally conditions... Listeners, this show assumes you understand what Trophy Dark or Trophy Gold are. I'm not going to go into all the details, but normally conditions are just like one-line descriptions of something that happens to your character. But what Michael's done here is they get progressively worse. So, you know, there's like the initial condition, and then as you get more ruin, that condition gets worse and worse. And I'll add here that this is how I've run Trophy anyway. Like I just give the character one condition, and then every time they get a ruin, I remind them of it or make it worse or ask them how it gets worse. But I like that it's sort of part of the rules here. I like that it's codified. And I have an example. One of the conditions is called a matter of time, and it starts with 6 buzzards form a perfect circle above you, circling in hot updrafts, gliding, waiting for you to fall. That's the initial condition. But then if you get another ruin, it can get worse to you give off the smell of something already dead. A buzzard swoops down and gets a bite out of you, and so forth. Like the situation becomes worse. And I really like that structure, in addition to the fact that they also just really help reinforce the setting and the theme of what's going on here.
Yeah, they're really fun, and I love the way that they escalate. It's really cool. It's a cool way to show that your character is fading or going to the dark side or whatever it is.
Which I know is something that you have an issue with in Trophy Dark as a general matter.
I do. All right, so, and for some reason, it doesn't bother me in this game as much as in a fantasy game. And that's interesting. That's just something I need to interrogate as we record podcast episodes. But I don't like the idea that there's a monster you can't face. But for some reason, in a Western context, I don't mind. And maybe that's all the genocide that Western, is kind of built on.
Maybe, yeah.
But I'm like, yeah, okay, my character dies. That's okay. But yeah, there is something that vexes me about not being able to turn to the monster and face it. And, I don't mind in Trophy Gold that it's a losing proposition and that the burden is eventually going to get you and it's not a good way of life. But I like that at the end of the day, you can turn and be like, all right, I'm giving it my shot, And in
right.
Trophy Dark, it's like, yeah, you're dead. But I also like playing to lose is fun, and I think playing Trophy Gold I might have gone the opposite route, right, than most people. Playing Trophy Gold and seeing Play to Lose play might have turned me around where I think I could have fun in a Trophy Dark game.
I mean, I will say that they do feel different. Playing Trophy Dark is not like playing Trophy Gold. They have distinct different feels. They're different games. I mean, they share a lot of core DNA, obviously, but like they're different in orientation and perspective and point of view. So a lot of people have this issue with Trophy Dark. This is a bit of a diversion, sorry, listeners, but a lot of people have an issue with Trophy Dark. We hear it all the time because of that exact reason. Like, I think there's like an assumption that like there's a certain level of heroism or a certain level of scrappy, adventuring, daring do that comes with the genre. Yeah, and I'm not saying that's what you think necessarily, but I think it's what a lot of people think.
It kind of is. I'm not above romanticizing a story.
Right. Yeah.
I hear you.
What I always try to like tell folks is it's more helpful to think of Trophy Dark in this way, which is the dark fantasy trappings are just the vehicle to get to a particular type of story. And it's the kind of story that you can tell with lots of different settings, i.e. Devil Aim for Me. But the idea is it's a story about hubris, and it's a story about not great people, and it's a story about this land that they are violating, fighting back. This is a very like topic du jour in the hobby right now, but it has a very like decolonialist point of view. Like, it's about pushing out these invaders. It doesn't always play out that way, but like that's kind of the story. Like, the story is very much about the downfall of bad people.
Yeah.
and so you have, I mean, you definitely have to want to play a story like that. But what I think is interesting is as you're playing it, you still want your character to do well, even though you know they're probably not, because the impact of the ultimate story feels better when you gave it your best shot, right?
Yeah.
And at the end, what we really got out of the experience was this very complete story arc for these characters. And it's about seeing how they spiral and how they fall down. And it's admittedly very bleak, but the fantasy part of it is not as important as you would think. Like, you can tell this story in so many different types of ways.
Yeah. And I think, Devil Aim for Me is showing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that.
The downfall of bad people is a great way to explain it.
Yeah, and I think that, like, you definitely have to be, like, in a particular headspace to play it. But once you get in that headspace, it's satisfying. And the stories have a richness and a depth that makes you think about them a long time after they're over. So I think there's value in that. And Trophy Gold is a pretty different game. I mean, because you can face monsters, you can, do more traditional adventuresome stuff, but still has some of those like those darker themes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Devil Aim for Me. Let's get back to that. I know you tried to segue us, and then I went back. Some other things I really liked about this thing is just so cool. Like, go buy it, listeners. There are questions throughout. Like, I think that's really great. And in particular, there's a set of questions that can be posed to the players to help define the villain, Bantam. And that's great. Like, I thought that part of it was super cool. The way you just sort of like pose questions to the group. And as the group's answering these questions, you're kind of like developing the backstory.
Yep. It's awesome. It's interesting that you can, I think two groups could play through it and be chasing very different people. And very, very, very different men, Absolutely, one could be someone who's kind of doomed, but maybe, you could see some humanity in him. And another could just be as bad as the devil himself and deserves everything he gets. I think that's cool. The build your own Bantam aspect of it is really amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. I'll also throw in that I like the way the rituals are done here too. They're just rituals, but they're reskinned. They're called something different. I can't remember what it is. Becoming Myth. But basically, they're rituals that sort of, they feel a little bit more like Tall Tales or like that mythic kind of like cowboy thing. Like there's one called The White Hat. There's one called Die With Your Boots On, that kind of thing. It's just a different way of understanding rituals, which I thought was pretty neat. I loved it. Anything else you want to say about Devil Aim for Me?
I liked it. I think it's definitely my favorite Trophy Dark incursion that I've read so far. I think the art is just right. Not too much, not too little. I'm curious to go check out the Devil Aim for Me Spotify song list.
Yes, that's right. There's a Spotify playlist. Yeah.
Very curious. Cool.
Awesome. Well, let's go to the next segment.
Into the Forest Dark.
So we are into the Forest Dark, and we are talking about asking good questions, which I think is something, wow, it's important. I think it's just important in life. Asking good questions is so important. I have found it professionally important. So like bringing it to the gaming table is huge. And I found that, I mean, of course we always did it, right? It's not like when Vincent Baker wrote in Apocalypse World, ask your players lots of leading questions, act on the answers. No one had ever done that before. But I just hadn't really thought about it too much as a technique that I really needed to work on. And it totally is.
No, I agree completely. It is people who have listened to my podcasting over the years know how I feel about this already, but like the posing of questions is so foundationally important to the act of good role playing that I don't even know. Well, I'll tell you what, by contrast, when I go to conventions and I sometimes play with people who don't come out of the same play culture that I do, I find it unbearable when the GM is not asking questions to the group and asking for our input to help define the scenes and do different things like that. I just think it's in the spirit of good collaborative play, and it's a major part of Trophy. I mean, I don't think that Trophy doesn't have it like baked in, like codified, like in some other games. It's not hardwired in, but it is a practice. So a lot of the incursions have questions peppered throughout. It's almost like a thing that developed because Trophy developed in the Gauntlets play culture. It had all that stuff built in just out of like tradition and habit. We didn't have to like kind of say like, okay, when you write your incursions, make sure you include the question, this question and that question. It's like, it just happened. But there's nothing wrong with codifying it, right? Like Devil Aim for Me, which we just talked about, it's in there in the incursion. Like there are specific points when you ask certain questions. Great topic. Love it. How do we want to begin here?
Well, I mean, I feel like the primordial RPG question, right, is what do you do? I describe something from you.
Yes.
I describe something to you, whatever it is, a dragon breathing fire, a goblin attacking you with a knife, a slime creeping up the walls, and what do you do? But I think it grows from there until it's a lot more interesting. And I think the themes in incursions make it really easy to, because I think the problem with saying ask a lot of questions is, it's like saying describe cool stuff, right? It's just right, well, what do you? That's a big. But the themes make it easy for you to narrow down what kind of questions to ask. So I had one incursion that the theme was parasites, and so I asked players throughout the game about people who had, one person had, grew up as a lockpick. So I was like, who in the criminal world really preyed on you? Just didn't give anything back into your life, never taught you anything, just took. And you can just ask people questions about when they were in a parasitic relationship, and you get cool stuff. And it adds to, and then there's little things like having a big mosquito caught in a web and a spider, wrapping it up or whatever it is, or a bunch of flies laying eggs in a goat. The players get it. It's nice little spice, but they get it. And I think the themes are where I would go to first for like, all right, what kind of questions should I be asking for this game?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when we're looking specifically at Trophy incursions, the incursions often have questions anyway, but there'll be moments when you want to know more about something. And a lot of times those questions will just, you can give it to the table, like let the table ask some questions of the players. You can think of them yourself. But I will say that I think that questions should be a part of prep. I think there's an aspect of GM prep here that's really, really important. So, and here I'm not just talking about Trophy, I'm talking about all role-playing games. I think that in indie RPGs, we have kind of I may be mischaracterizing this a little bit or overstating it, but I think that there's a little bit of like negative feeling about the idea of GM prep.
Yeah.
Because prep, I think we all have like bad memories of what that means. Like it means the GM who has thought of every possibility, they have like written down every aspect of the setting and the scenario, and they don't leave any room for collaboration. They just sort of dictate the story, right? And that is bad prep. But I think there's a good way to do prep, and I think that questions are a really important part of that. Like I don't think that, to me, like prep is not something to be maligned, because I actually think that if you're careful in how you construct certain parts of your prep, in particular questions, it really elevates the experience a lot and actually incredibly facilitates collaborative play. And so, well, before I keep going, just what do you think about the idea of like the intersection between GM prep and questions. Like, as I feel like it's a prep issue.
Yeah, no,
right?
it's huge. And it leads into a way that I've been using questions lately that is new for me. There's like that post-game email that goes out like the week of the game. So if you're playing on Thursday, Tuesday, you're like, hey, everybody good?
Right, yeah.
And sometimes I'll put a question, hey, marinate on this. And I'll put a question in.
Mm-hmm.
That way they're thinking about it. And so when I ask them in play, they're like, I've been thinking about that all week since you sent that email, and here's what I came up with. So you're not gotcha on anybody. That can be really, really helpful. I love sending questions to players just to get them marinating and daydreaming during the week. Writing down some questions and making a part of your prep is super smart. That's a nice way to do it.
It's like the easiest kind of prep, and it leads to fabulous results, because truly the best results are always the results that like come from the whole table.
Yeah.
And a well-constructed question has a way of eliciting that.
Yeah.
And I think we should talk a little bit about the actual construction of the question, because you can't just ask any question to get the right effect, right? Like, there's a way you ask the question. There's a way you construct it. So for me, there's a question of like, what is the goal of the question? So like, if I'm writing a question to pose to the players, when I'm kind of scribbling down a scenario or whatever, I think about, in this scene, in this particular part of the module or the scenario or whatever we're doing, what am I trying to elicit from the players? And I kind of use that as my starting point for like the questions I'm going to ask. And I developed a couple of question posing techniques, which are very, 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 very quasi-famous in the scene. I think many people know about them, but maybe they don't know that I made them up or whatever, right? But they're like establishing questions and what I call paint the scene questions. And they're question types that serve two really different functions. So for me, what I call an establishing question is a very leading question that gives players a chance to directly tie their character into the setting or scenario. So I usually pose a question like this at the very beginning of play to get them hooked in. So we're starting and I'm like, okay, you guys are headed down the road. You're going to adventuring location XYZ or whatever, right? And then I have some establishing questions that I have usually written for the specific characters if I know about the characters beforehand, but I also have like some generic ones too. But basically it's something like, okay, cleric, you know that there is a secret underground shrine at this castle. Tell me about that, or what is it? Wizard, you've heard about legends of a magical treasure that's buried there. What is it? That kind of thing, right? And it's very, very, very focused and very leading. I don't ask like, you've heard about something cool there, or you've even heard about a treasure there. It's, you've heard about an ancient magical treasure there. What is it?
So I want to talk about why that's good and why some other versions of that type of questioning might be really frustrating.
Go for it.
So when I've seen you do that, because I've listened to your actual play, because I enjoy it, you do it in the beginning of the play of game. You're not doing it in order to throw off GMing responsibilities. You're not doing it after they've fought a bunch in order to discover something. You're doing it in the beginning so you can riff off of it later and incorporate it. And you listen very carefully, and you're definitely writing it down, and you definitely use it before the game is over.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to use that kind of question at the end, when they fought tooth and nail to get to the end of the door, and you're like, okay, what's in the door? And it's like, when someone does that, I'm like, go F yourself, GM a little bit. Like, what's wrong with you?
That would be really
the timing of when you do it and the way you do it and the way you use it is really important. It makes it so that everybody's contributing, but then they can also like jump back into their character and play and discover new things too.
That's a great insight. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right. When I do it, I do reincorporate. Reincorporation is important.
Yeah.
You're not just asking the questions to give the players a chance to be brilliant on the spot. You're asking the questions because you want them, because you're looking for them to give you things. This is especially effective if you have a few sessions to play, because you can kind of take their answer and sit on it for a little bit and then circle back to it or reincorporate it like in session 2 or 3 or whatever. And players love that, by the way. That's like big, like rockstar GM points. But even if you just have one session, you can do it in a way where you reincorporate a little later. Yeah, like you said, you're riffing off the players. You're taking what they give you and you're doing cool stuff with it.
And the other players will riff off it too. Like, you'll see stuff that come up in those questions come up in players' devil's bargains in really cool ways.
Right. Yeah.
It's a cool technique. I like that one. What was the other one?
The other one is called Paint the Scene. And this is the one that is much more closely associated with me as a game designer or game master or whatever. The idea behind Paint the Scene is this is a question that's posed in order to explore an idea or a theme or a motif about a location. So I'll give you my great classic example is the characters have just wandered into the villa of a Medusa. I asked the Paint the Scene question, what does your character see or experience that tells you this is the lair of a Medusa?
Right.
And then they think about, like, well, what does that mean? And so they might say, all the mirrors have drapes over them. There are statues of people all over the place, that kind of thing. So it's a way of, like, fleshing out the scene, but in a way that's not just surface level. It's about an idea rather than just, like, visual trappings. It's connected to something fundamentally important to the location. So this is baked into my game Brindlewood Bay. The locations for each mystery in Brindlewood Bay, and listeners, Brindlewood Bay is a game about little old ladies that solve murder mysteries and might be facing down a Cthulhuid entity at the end. It's Murder, She Wrote meets Shadow over Innsmouth. That's my pitch. But in that game, the locations for the mysteries, they don't say anything about the location. They're just a question. They're a paint the scene question about developing that location. So one of the locations is a tourist spot. And the question says something about, what about this tourist spot makes it difficult for you to do your job here, right? Like that kind of thing. It's about exploring an idea. So that's another type of question to achieve a certain type of goal.
Those are interesting, different types of questions, right? Because one really comes at the beginning of the session and one really comes kind of towards the end or
in the middle of it.
Yeah, or in the middle. That's important.
Yeah, so any other thoughts about, like, what makes a good question?
You know, there was a type of question that came up in the Paperflesh Advent. They asked a question like, who do you think the people approaching think is the leader based on looking at you? And I thought that was interesting, is like asking them a question about what kind of first impression your group gives or what kind of impression you give is an interesting one. I thought that was a neat one that got you to say something about yourself, but in a way that I just thought was really interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. The possibilities are kind of endless as long as you, as part of your preparation as the GM, if you've given a lot of thought about what are you trying to elicit with this question? What type of experience are you trying to have at the table? What's nice about trophy incursions, because bringing it back to trophy for a minute, what's nice is that the author of the incursion has thought of that for you. You know, in Trophy Dark, for example, almost, you know, in most incursions, all the rings have like these different types of questions to elicit certain types of gameplay. You can take that and bring it in just into your everyday non-trophy gaming, right? I think that's what Judd and I are trying to say here, listeners. Anything else you want to say about questions? Any other thoughts?
It can be really simple too. When a character first kills someone in a game, I like to ask them if that's the first time they've ever killed anyone.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
That's a big... It lets everyone know that killing is a terrible thing that's going to have consequences and that you should be thinking about it for a while. We're not just slaughterhouses.
Yeah.
So after someone, like, even if the other person really, like, even if it was a really reasonable self-defense kill, like, I just like to ask, like, hey, have you ever killed anyone before? Like, has this character ever killed anyone before?
It's a big moment.
It's huge.
That's another way that questions can be powerful, which is to memorialize important moments in the gameplay.
There are some that are just evergreen that I think are good for trophy goal, but can go into just about anything. Asking about who taught you things is always a good one, especially if the character really does something awesome. You have an awesome combat and they get to describe beheading the ghoul. You're like, you know, who taught you to use a sword? Who taught you to do that? And it's like, oh yeah, it's a good, you know, because our teachers are such important relationships. And I think because of the way a lot of RPGs work, sometimes we don't think about them enough. Who taught you? Have you ever killed anyone before? If they get wounded, you can ask about other times they've been wounded. What was the worst wound you've ever taken? Is this it? Like, is this the closest you've ever been to death? Asking them about love and what their connections are is always good. Really, I think with Trophy Gold, you want to really look at those drives and be like, okay, let's dig into that. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And they don't have to know when they start. It should start to be fleshed out as we go. So anyway, there are all kinds. And I think just thinking about different kinds and looking at the player's character sheet should dredge up some questions about them.
You know, it's funny you mention that because Jesse Ross, the author of Trophy, and I, we had this thought because So, for the Kickstarter, we're doing those cards.
Yeah.
The character creation cards. Mm-hmm. And what's cool about those character creation cards is each of them has a leading question on it that don't have to be asked by anybody. It's just a way of the player sort of like giving them a prompt to think about their character.
Yeah.
So you want to impress the heir of Nagane, and there's a question that kind of explores like, well, what the hell does that mean, right? What'd your brother do to end up in Barsoul prison, that kind of thing. So I just want to kind of throw that out there. Questions are just such an important part of Trophies of General Matter. We're baking them in everywhere we can, and because it's good gameplay.
Yeah.
It's just great gameplay. And I like your idea of like these evergreen questions. That's really great. I don't think I've ever really thought about them that way, but I think I'm going to start. And I might even like copy this list you have here in the notes.
Yeah. In writing this down, I was trying to... Jason has started, right? So he has a question he asks at the beginning of play to flesh things out. And then he has a question he asks at the end of play or in the midst of action to kind of add details to an already growing tense situation. And that's just 2. And, do you love anyone? Have you ever killed anyone? Who broke your heart? What happened when this character tried to create some kind of art? Who was the first person to betray you? What is your most shameful sin? What's the worst wound you've ever taken? Who taught you how to do whatever? Anything that you can ask that you could probably ask anyone is a big deal. It's funny, the question story I always think of, I just moved upstate after living in New York City for 6 years. And so because of pre-COVID New York City's dining and the way spaces and New York City restaurants, sometimes you get to sit next to a really bad date. And the feeling I came away from is dudes need to learn how to ask better questions. Like guys would be on dates with someone who was really interesting. The person would go to the bathroom and I'd want to like stop eating and like break this fake wall that we have and be like, ask them questions about their job. They do really interesting work.
I know it.
So anyway, this question stuff definitely does not end at the gaming table. It goes everywhere. And it's just, I think part of being a good human is showing that interest. And it's a good way to show that you're interested in the characters.
I love it.
Yeah, questions are good.
That's great.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, in game and life. Love it. Let's go to the next segment.
Yep.
Woven on the Loom.
Okay, listeners, our theme is fate. One of the things that happens often is you might be fated to die. You might have to tangle with death. And so Judd and I have come up with some custom goodies related to the idea of death and defying your fate. Shall I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So what I'm doing for this week is a trophy gold version of Dungeon World's famous Last Breath move.
Okay.
So, Judd, I know you know, but listeners, Last Breath in Dungeon World is a move that basically anytime a character dies, you roll some dice and you have a chance to come back. You're not necessarily dead. And what it looks like in the fiction is your character is going to the gates of death, and death might offer them a bargain to say, okay, look, if you take this bargain, if you go back to the mortal coil and do XYZ or whatever, then you get to return. And usually they come back, they're changed in some way, there's a price to pay, but they're alive, they come back. That's called Last Breath. It's a way of saving your character, but in a way that's narratively interesting and involves this idea of death personified. It's pretty cool. It's a major strength of Dungeon World as a game. I wanted to do a Trophy Gold version. Now, my Trophy Gold version, it cannot be attempted at any time. It can only be attempted if your treasure hunter has previously done something that is ritually related to the idea of death. So they've either communed with death, they've participated in some kind of death cult ritual, perhaps they're loyal to a sister related to death and dying, something like that. Basically, there has to be some kind of connection to the idea of death and your character. Once that connection is established, you can then invoke this Last Breath. And the way it works is when you hit Ruin 6, instead of retiring your character, you erase a number of gold from your hoard and then roll, this is for Trophy Gold, obviously, and then roll an equal number of gold dice. And if any of the gold dice come up 6, or on those sweet custom gold dice, they just come up with the one side that has a logo. If any of them come up 6, then death will make a deal with you that will allow you to return to the mortal coil. And whatever that deal is will change you in some way.
Nice.
What do you think?
I like it.
Yeah?
I definitely ripped it off and put it into my Incarnation of Death that I made in the process of finishing
Nice.
below. So,
Okay.
yeah, I like that there's an economy to it, right? You have to spend money for the sisters, which I think is cool. It also should be encouraging the GM to ask questions about what sisters and saints and deities they worship and how they do so.
Yeah. It's an opportunity to definitely flesh out the sort of idea of immortality and like the afterlife, right? So,
Yeah.
so when I wrote it, and to be perfectly honest, I wrote it very fast. But when I wrote it, I felt inspired.
Yeah.
So, but when I wrote it, I was thinking about like the erasing of money, like not so much as like physically paying money, because to me the hoard is kind of an abstraction.
Yeah.
But like more the idea of everything has a cost.
Yeah.
There's this idea of cost, and I just wanted to kind of reflect that a little bit. And yeah, so that's kind of what I came up with. And there's still a chance it won't work. You have to roll some gold dice. This is another excuse to use gold dice, which I always love.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty happy with it. Somebody out there tries it, I'd love to hear how it goes.
Yeah. I like the idea of where does that money go, or what does it even mean, right? Like, does it go towards building a church for some death-related sister,
Right. Yeah.
or does it just disappear? Is
right. Yeah.
Do they say, no, we don't want that gold, we want this much gold, but for these other things that we know you really love because they're part of your life? And so the sister makes those kind of demands. I think it's neat. I love the idea of having to pay for more time. That's great.
You got to pay for something, right? Well, and it kind of alludes to like classic D&D too, right? Where we've all played in games where you pay 30,000 gold to like get the local high priest to resurrect your character or whatever. So it was just kind of, I was playing with some of those ideas. Okay, so what do you have for us this week on Woven on the Loom?
So I've always liked the idea of what does death look like? What if it, in this magical fantasy world that is also very dark, can it just show up?
Yeah.
And would the players fight it?
Mm-hmm.
I made it Endurance 12 so that you can't just beat it in a straight fight, right? Something has to be done.
Right. Well, you could. It would be hard, though. You'd have to get boxcars.
Right. It would be very difficult. Yeah. The odds are slim. So
you could get lucky, but...
Yeah, so I've got like an Endurance 12 Incarnation of Death. The 6 things it'll do, it points at you.
Mm-hmm.
It swings its scythe,
Mm-hmm.
Shows you your life in an instant.
Ooh, that's good.
Snips your life's fate cord, vomits dust at you, and then totally ripping off Jason's trophy gold move. It offers a grim bargain for a little more time.
Nice.
And then I would want more weaknesses than this, but like it loves a competition sometimes, and can be driven through mirrors back into the Quiet Lands, which is
nice.
Old Jewish myth. When you're mourning someone, you cover your mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice to incorporate my old Jewish roots into that. And then defenses are that it's deathless. So like I'm not even sure what that means, but like I think you're not going to be able to drown it, right? Like it's
well, you can't really kill it. I think.
Yeah. It's going to come back.
Maybe you can save yourself.
It's probably going to come back with friends, right? So I just like the idea of possibly fighting death, and then possibly having the character be like, you know what, guys, no, don't do this.
Yeah.
I'm going. Like you could have that. It invites that moment too, where the player says, I've had a good run. Give me a good wake, and I'll see you all on the other side eventually.
I love it. Yeah, that's great. I'm looking at your the monster habits here, and the third one, which is shows you your life in an instant, kind of hearkening back to 20 minutes ago in our discussion during Into the Forest Dark. What a great opportunity for a question.
Yeah.
So they show you your life in an instant, and maybe you tell the player that's what happens, and then you ask them, of what they've shown you, what are you going to miss the most? Right. Yeah.
What amazing thing do you see in your future? And like, then you have this Incarnation of Death be like, get out of my way, or else you'll never see that. Why are you joining this battle to do something unnatural?
Yeah.
I love when monsters are really reasonable. That's a reasonable monster.
Nice.
So cool.
Well, listeners, that is our show. We hope you enjoyed it. The Sixth Ring is part of the Trophy Podcast, and the Trophy Podcast is produced by The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. We are on Patreon. If you'd like to support this program on Patreon, it's patreon.com/gauntlet. Judd, thank you so much. Before we go, is there anything else you want to...
No, this was worth it for me just to get hearing you talk about establishing the questions and painting the scene in that much detail was really cool. It was really nice. So yeah, thank you, Jason.
It's a joy for me as well. It's a pleasure. And thank you so much to our wonderful producer, Rich Rodgers.
Thanks, Rich.
Take care. Hello, listeners. I wanted to let you know about Codex Hearthfire, the newest issue of the Gauntlet's tabletop role-playing game magazine, now available on Patreon. Hearthfire includes Packet, a game about the transatlantic journey from Liverpool to New York in the 1800s. Can you navigate the troubled waters between hope and home? Respite, a game of comfort and companionship through adversity, explored via stories told around a communal fireplace between battles. The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soulless, a new mystery for Brindlewood Bay. Trophy Gold Hearthfire, a major expansion for Trophy Gold that adds new storytelling options to downtime and upkeep. 36 precarious places to make camp, 9 original illustrations, and a beautiful custom layout. You can get Codex Hearthfire in the Gauntlet Patreon feed by making a $6 pledge in July. Your pledge helps support all the great work we do in the Gauntlet, including our Gauntlet Open Gaming Weekends and this very podcast. Thanks.